skeletal muscle makes up 40% of the body. By mass, weight, it is the largest endocrine organ system in the body. It's actually an organ system. Now let's think about, what does skeletal muscle do? The first thing that all your listeners are going to think about, or your viewers, is exercise. They're going to think about performance and sprinters and maybe weightlifters and the skinny tanks and the fake tans. But skeletal muscle is so much more than that. It is the focal point for healthy aging and longevity that begins very young. And skeletal muscle does a number of things that it is extremely underappreciated for. Number one, and probably most obvious, is that it's your metabolic sink, meaning it's the place where you dispose of glucose. Glucose is from the carbohydrates that you eat. When your blood levels of glucose get high, hopefully your pancreas, which releases insulin. Insulin is a peptide hormone that will move blood glucose out of the bloodstream into the cells, starts in skeletal muscle. That is the primary point where insulin acts based on weight. What else does it do? Skeletal muscle at rest actually burns free fatty acids. People are worried about triglycerides and cholesterol, fatty acids. Skeletal muscle is a primary site for this. Really important to understand. The other underappreciated aspect of this is when you have unhealthy skeletal muscle. What do we think about when we think about unhealthy skeletal muscle? From a visual perspective, it's the idea of your muscle looking like a marbled steak versus a fillet. How does skeletal muscle become unhealthy? Skeletal muscle is like a suitcase. When you open the suitcase and you are going on a trip for 4 days, but you pack for 30, and if those clothes are the substrates, that they are the foods that you're eating, have nowhere to go, it remains in the bloodstream or it spills back out into the bloodstream. Ultimately, skeletal muscle provides a location for places for these macronutrients to go. That is one place. That is one obvious piece to health and longevity. Now, I will mention that the loss of skeletal muscle is more critical than the gain of body fat. The current paradigm talks about gaining of body fat and how it increases inflammation. All of that is true. Low levels of inflammation can lead to a multitude of risk factors. But where does that start? That starts in skeletal muscle first. Obesity is the second step. Weight gain is the second step. Fat infiltration into the skeletal muscle is the second step. So that's one aspect. Another aspect of skeletal muscle as the organ of longevity is that it is your body's armor. When you imagine aging, many people think about it as a potentially slow decline. It doesn't have to happen, and it probably none of your listeners are thinking it's going to happen, which is amazing. But it's actually not a slow decline. Typically, what happens during aging is there's a catabolic crisis, a series of catabolic crises. For example, if someone gets sick and they go on bed rest for a week, if someone breaks a hip and they're on bed rest, if they get pneumonia, if they get anything where you are laying in bed, this is what we call a catabolic crisis. When an individual is young, their ability to respond and go back up to baseline from a muscle health perspective, meaning muscle mass and strength, is robust. Hormones are high, people are typically very physically active. As an individual ages and is not as active as they once were, they never get back up to baseline. Every catabolic crisis that happens creates a very significant decline in overall health. And if you believe that skeletal muscle is the organ of longevity, and I've highlighted that it is the place for glucose disposal, it is a primary site for insulin resistance and fatty acid oxidation, that when you lose that tissue, you have subsequent issues and you are predisposed to diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease, these diseases that are rooted in metabolic dysfunction. And I can go on and on. There's more that skeletal muscle is responsible for. I'll wrap up with 2, maybe 3. The other thing is when you contract skeletal muscle, it releases myokines. Skeletal muscle is an endocrine organ. There are 600 plus myokines that travel throughout the body and do various things. The most famous myokine is interleukin 6. And interleukin 6 is released from exercising skeletal muscle in the relationship of the intensity and duration of exercise. What does it do? It lowers inflammation. It dampens the inflammation that could be released from macrophages when they release interleukin 15 or interleukin 6. It also releases BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and a handful of other myokines. Now, I'm going to blow your mind really quickly. It's not just the exercise from a calorie perspective, from a muscle health perspective, from getting the flux out. So you need flux for skeletal muscle to be healthy. The other underappreciated fact about skeletal muscle is exercising skeletal muscle releases these myokines. If you are sedentary, you do not get the benefit of these myokines.